Hello everyone, Allison Steinberg here with LindellTV. We are joined by the incredible Congressman Eli Crane, who represents Arizona's 2nd Congressional District.
Yep.
You also sit on the House Oversight Committee and Homeland Committee, as well as the Freedom Caucus. So
that's right.
Thanks so much for being with us. We truly appreciate all that you do. And I'm excited to talk to you because I know last night was a bit upsetting for us true American patriots that are trying to reform this nation. The House just approved continued funding for the National Endowment for Democracy, which I know you've described as fueling global censorship and domestic propaganda. For viewers that don't necessarily pay close attention to all this, tell us more about what this NED entails and why this is fundamentally at odds with free speech and conservative values.
Yeah, I think, if you go back into the history of NED, it was started by President Reagan as an attempt to combat communism around the world. And but what it's turned into is very problematic. It's fueling color revolutions and regime change around the globe. It's become a global censorship arm of Washington, D.C. and the deep state in trying to censor any opposition views, the populist movement, etc. And so it's become a real problem. And it's interesting too, Allison, because when you look at the title itself, National Endowment for Democracy, most people think, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like when you look at what's going on in Minnesota right now. You have, funding childcare or daycares, or, these autism centers.
Yeah.
And the problem with a lot of the Republicans up here, that I think we had 81 of them vote against my amendment last night on the floor, is I don't think they do much research into these programs and what these programs that have virtuous, good names, what they actually do behind the scenes. And that's why I'm grateful for independent reporters like yourself, Mike Benz, other people that actually dig into these organizations to see what they're actually doing. And I made a point to some other members of the House Freedom Caucus earlier this week. When you look at what's going on in Minnesota with some of these programs, and all the fraud there, if you don't think that if a program is based overseas, the fraud isn't 10x of what it is here, because we actually have Republican legislators and others that can look into the fraud where we don't, have that type of oversight overseas. You're crazy.
Yeah.
And so this is just one of those things where Republicans, failed to represent the American people and, what they actually want their tax dollars being spent on. But I'm actually surprised that it got as many votes as it did.
Yeah.
And we'll keep fighting, and we'll run it again the next time.
Yeah, well, we have to, because to your point, 81 Republicans that voted in favor for this is deeply concerning. Did this organization play a role in silencing President Trump? Because we've heard that.
It did, and it tries to silence populist movements all over the place.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's an NGO. If people want to, independently give their money to it, that's
Right.
their choice, right? But when we're taking American people's tax dollars to the tune of over $300 million and funding this organization, one of the interesting things too about this organization is when you look into the donation reports, 90% of NED officials support Democrats solely.
Wow.
Right? So it's a very partisan organization as well. And one other thing that should tell people a lot about this vote that took place last night is that every single Democrat voted for it.
There you go.
That should tell you all you need to know about this bill and why you should be frustrated with your representative if they didn't stand with us last night and trying to defund it.
Absolutely. That that should really tell you everything you need to know,
Right.
as you just said. I know you've introduced legislation to cut off the funding to NED, but as we just touched on, it received $350 million of our tax dollars.
Yep.
Yet again, this was actually part of a $90 billion plus spending package that passed last night. I know you sort of touched on this just a moment ago, but how do you explain Republicans voting to fund organizations like this that continually and actively undermine their own political movement? Is it just because they don't know, they're not digging into it, or is there some larger agenda at play behind the scenes here?
I think a lot of it is ignorance. Last Congress, I tried to defund USAID, and this was before DOGE came in, and half of the Republicans voted against it, and then Elon Musk came in and started taking his team through many of the agencies and started to reveal the amounts of fraud, waste, and abuse, and even corruption in many of these agencies. And that's when you saw a shift in Republicans starting to recognize what was the problem with USAID. So I think it's an educational piece.
Okay.
And I think that a lot of, Republicans are just watching your mainstream outlets.
Yeah.
They're not tuning into LindellTV. They're not watching the War Room with Steve Bannon.
That's right.
And so they don't really know what's going on with, these organizations. And I think that's why interviews like this are important.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we thank you so much for the kind words. I wish more of our representatives would give us the opportunity to talk with them, because half the time they just run away from us. We'll get into that in just a moment. But let's talk about the Senate, because this seems to be the legislative graveyard. It's where all good things seemingly go to die. We have Congressman Tim Burch's bill that would defund the Taliban. Like, why are we funding the Taliban? That is so insane to me. Perhaps the most important bill that's just sitting dead on arrival in the Senate is the SAVE Act, which would require voter ID. Like, how do we even have a country if we don't have free and fair elections? Right. It's mind-boggling. What is happening in the Senate, and why are we not getting anything done there?
Well, I think Republicans in general tend to be pretty reactive. We're not aggressive, and we're not forward-thinking. And this is the problem that I see with Senate leadership and senators being unwilling to, basically cancel the filibuster and end the filibuster. Yeah. Right? We need 60 votes in the Senate, which is a much higher threshold than you have in the House. Yeah. And so you'll see the House pass a lot of good legislation, and then, to your point, you'll see it go to die in the Senate, like the SAVE Act that I voted on, I believe, 2 times, voted for it. And one of the interesting things about the filibuster in the Senate is that Democrats already tried to kill it a couple years back. Right. And there were 2 members of their conference, I believe it was Sinema and Joe Manchin, that actually stopped the Democrats from, nuking the filibuster, destroying it. And so the interesting thing is both of them are gone, right? The 2 people that would have stopped it are now gone. Yeah. And so if you're forward thinking at all, you're going to realize exactly what the Democrats are going to do once they come back into power. They're going to nuke the filibuster, get rid of it. They will no longer need 60 votes, and they'll just need a majority to actually move their legislation forward. And so I'm saying, and many of my colleagues are saying, that are a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more pragmatic, are saying, let's do that now, and so we can get the remainder of Trump's, agenda that the American people voted on through, because they're going to do it anyway. Yeah. Why not beat them to the punch? Exactly. And that's one of the reasons I came to Washington, because I saw how reactive Republicans were. They're like gentlemen who managed the decline of the country, really. And it's if you're gonna try and save the country, you can't think that way, you can't act that way. You have to be aggressive, and you have to be willing to make bold moves. And a lot of my conferences you saw last night is not willing to do that. Yeah, it is very sad, especially for the future of our nation. Like I said, I don't know if we have a country much longer if we allow this to continue. There's so much work that needs to get done, and it just seems like it's not happening. And we have this rare moment in time to get it done. I know, where we have the presidency, the Senate, and the House. And this is, I know a lot of your people that are watching this program right now, they're pulling their hair out. They're like, we gave you everything you guys said you needed to make the changes that we want, and you're not doing it. Exactly. And it's frustrating to watch. It's frustrating to be up here and be in the middle of it. But at the same time, we can't stop fighting. Yeah, amen. And that's why we love having you on, because you are a true fighter, and there are unfortunately not many of you here in Washington. But with that, let's now turn to the Minnesota fraud. You're on the House Oversight Committee. You did a fantastic job at the hearing just last week. Treasury officials are now saying it's at least $9 billion in fraud in the state of Minnesota. One of obviously the largest welfare schemes in history of the nation. I actually had the opportunity to talk to Ilhan Omar a couple times this week. I saw that. She wasn't very pleasant, but I think her demeanor was very telling. She thinks she's above the law. She's obviously not scared that anything's going to happen to her. But I wanted to ask you firsthand, because I think maybe you have some insight you can share with us. Is there going to be accountability for Ilhan Omar? I mean, I've talked to Chairman Comer. He said she's at the top of the list to be investigated. But is anything happening on that front? I don't know. Because of the disappointments that I've seen since I've been up here for 3 years, I'm not holding my breath that anything's going to happen to Ilhan Omar. And I do think that there are going to be many more people arrested in Minnesota that have actually been involved in some of these fraudulent schemes. I know Nick Shirley came out with a new video just last night that I watched,
really good,
based on the transportation companies that are, saying that they're driving people to, their medical appointments and whatnot, and none of these vehicles are moving, or when he shows up to these places that are listed on the state register,
it's a liquor store.
It's a liquor store, or and they're being run out of there by the owners, which you wouldn't see anywhere else in America.
No.
So I do think that I do love the fact that Nick Shirley is reporting on these things, and I want to commend the administration for, halting federal funding from going to some of these areas. And I think there's a lot more work to be done. But I'm glad that the administration's actually doing something. And one of the things that we did to kind of get Nick Shirley's back was we nominated him for the Congressional Gold Medal. And the reason I did that was because this guy has uncovered, with his partner, I think his partner's name is Dave or something like that, they've uncovered the biggest fraudulent scheme in U.S. history. And it was just an independent reporter like yourself, right?
Exactly.
And so I want to stand alongside these independent reporters and show them not only are we watching what you're doing, but we're grateful for what you're doing. He's getting death threats now. He has to roll with security everywhere he goes. And, I just want him to know that how important what he's doing is, and what you guys do is, and that there's many of us in Congress that appreciate what you're doing and also stand behind you, right? And I also want to encourage the next generation of independent reporters to, get a microphone, get a cell phone, go out, start doing these very things so that the American people can see what's behind some of these programs, whether it's USAID, National Endowment of Democracy, or a daycare in Minnesota, where their taxpayers are going, because they deserve that.
For sure.
They deserve accountability, and they deserve us to be fiscally responsible with what, where their tax dollars go.
100%. And, with all of the madness going on in the world today, I think we are in this unique period in time where independent reporters have such an opportunity that we never had before with social media and outlets like X. Thank you, Elon Musk, for allowing us to speak freely. I mean, just back in the COVID era of 2020, you couldn't even dare speak out, or you were silenced and censored and shut down. I had my accounts deleted 4 times. So it just should, I think, serve as an encouragement for others to continue speaking out and to be unafraid. And I think, the backlash should empower people, because obviously the other side doesn't like what's going on here, right?
No, they definitely don't. And I think that's why you're seeing them push these radical, street protests and whatnot, because they know that that's a way to kind of bludgeon you into submission and silence, and that's what they want. And I'm grateful to this administration, that they're not backing down, they're not taking their foot off the gas, especially in hot spots like in Minnesota, because that's basically just to surrender and admit defeat, and they're not doing that. They promise the American people that, hey, these 10, 15 million people that came here illegally, especially those that have committed crimes, we're gonna charge them, we're gonna deport them if we can. And I'm grateful that we actually have strong leadership in the White House.
Absolutely, it's certainly nice, especially after what we had the last time around. So hopefully we can keep the momentum going. Just one last question for you on Ilhan Omar. I just wanted to get clarification directly from you, because I know Nancy Mace has repeatedly pushed to subpoena her and her brothers, even some of her family's immigration records, but the motion seemed to be getting tabled time and time again. But it looked like maybe that is reversed now. I mean, do you have any insight on where exactly that stands?
So the thing is, from my understanding, is that the Oversight Committee is willing to subpoena Ilhan Omar and some of her financial records and whatnot. That's my understanding on it. And what I heard from the chairman was we didn't even need to have a representative from the Oversight Committee actually bring those up, because what the Democrats did is, as soon as Nancy and others brought those amendments up, then Democrats started doing the same thing, right? And so I think where the chairman was trying to go with it is, hey, we can subpoena anybody we want, but if individual members of the Oversight Committee start subpoenaing people, then the Democrats start doing it, and it just turns into a mess. And so I think I think that moving forward, there's a good likelihood that we'll get into some of those investigations without actually having to play some type of ball with the Democrats on their
good.
subpoenas.
Good. That certainly is promising. We'll be looking forward to that. And then as we wrap up here, I know Bill and Hillary were expected in front of the House Oversight Committee this weekend. They ignored their congressional subpoenas. But then, of course, figures like Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro
went to jail. Yeah.
Went to jail for the exact same thing. Can we expect this for the Clintons?
So I know next week I've heard next week we're going to get a chance to vote on whether or not to hold them in contempt of Congress. I will be voting yes for that.
Love it.
Probably no shocker to your audience. And then, we'll see where that goes. But that'll be another interesting vote to watch right there. And
Yes.
I wouldn't be surprised to see, maybe to a lesser scale, some of what you saw last night. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I love, a lot of people watching your show don't even realize this, but the House Freedom Caucus actually had to take a very aggressive, threatening posture towards leadership to even get the Chip Roy amendment for last night and my amendment on the floor.
Okay. Wow.
And so people don't even realize we have to fight and threaten just to even get amendments on many of these bills. And so, it's going to be an interesting vote to watch next week. But the thing that I think is the best thing that happened about those two amendments getting to the floor is the American people watching this now got to see where your representatives stand.
Very true.
And then they get to make the choice. Are we going to primary this individual?
Yeah.
Are we going to get behind another individual who will actually do our bidding? Because a lot of these bills are constructed in a way, Allison, to where they're huge, massive bills, and they just put everything in there, and they try and shield members of our party from taking hard votes. And members of our party are constantly asking leadership, hey, please don't make us take these hard votes because we don't want, we don't need the political headache back home so that our voters can actually see what's going on. And that's why they call it the swamp.
Yeah.
And
seriously.
the way I look at it, Allison, if you're not prepared to take hard votes up here, what are you even doing up here?
Exactly.
Right? So,
I think a lot of this could be rooted out if we could get back to single
subject, germane bills. And when we ousted Kevin McCarthy, I was a part of that group. That's what a lot of that fight was about, was single subject, germane bills. There were many things that we were fighting for in there. We thought we'd got a win, and then after a couple months, he went right back to business as usual, which is why, I think 8 or 9 of us decided we're going to try and fire the speaker. Yeah. And it ended up in, a historic firing, and I'm not sorry about it.
I love it. Well, we need to keep that momentum going. I guess as we wrap up here, I just have one last question for you. The nation is so incredibly divided right now, and I think it's fair to say Democrats are complicit in, riling up their base, encouraging them to resist ICE, as if they're the enemy, protecting the criminals over the people.
Right.
Is there any hope at actually restoring this deep division that has been seeded throughout the nation and creating a United States of America once again?
I would like to say that, I'm hopeful, but I don't really see that happening. I think so many of these, individuals have been indoctrinated in our education system that obviously has leaned left for a very, very, very long time. They've been taught to hate our country. And it's all for them. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always revolution. And this is just a shout out to a friend of mine and a martyr, Charlie Kirk. I remember meeting Charlie several years ago, and just being super impressed with him because many of us, including myself, thought that academia was so far gone. Yeah. Why even waste your time fighting there? Find a new area that's not so far gone that we can actually make headway. Charlie showed us that many of us were wrong, and that you could make a headway in academia, and he did it. He did. I couldn't believe some of the campuses that he showed up to. Hundreds and thousands of young students who were so tired of being force-fed a narrative and being failed by their teachers if they didn't regurgitate the narrative, who said, hey, I'm willing to hear another side. And Charlie was so persuasive, so well prepared, and so intelligent, he was able to convince many of these students that there is an alternative, and it's a lot more rational, and it's a lot more in line with our founding fathers and what they wanted. And so I hope that movement continues, and I still have many friends at Turning Point. But when it goes to whether or not this nation can be united, I think there's only one way for that to happen, and that's for us to turn back to God as a nation. You know, when you see a nation or a family or a community turn away from God, it always ends the same way. And that's one thing I tell my voters all the time. It's the reason, I think, the biggest reason that we've gone so far off track here is because we have rejected God. We've pushed him out of all of our institutions, and we've, basically, mocked him. And I think that's the biggest reason you see so much chaos in the U.S.
I could not agree with you more. That was very beautifully said, and I totally agree. We live in a godless society, and it's so sad to see the fallout from that and what this incredible country has become due to the lack of God in our society. I pray every day that we can turn it around and fix it, but we know you're working hard to do that, and we're so grateful for you. So Congressman Eli Crane, thank you so
Austin.
much.
Appreciate it.